He fed a desperate mother bobcat, and 24 hours later, she trusted him with her babies. At first, it seemed impossible. Why would a wild predator place her family's survival in the hands of a lonely man? But what began as a single act of compassion spiraled into a fight for life itself. Because the deeper he stepped into her world, the more he uncovered a dangerous secret hidden in the mountains, one that powerful men would kill to protect. With every choice, the stakes grew higher, not just for the wild family depending on him, but for his own survival. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It turns this little corner of the internet into something bigger, something shared. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rugged Arizona mountains, where Jonas Riker's weathered cabin stood like a lonely sentinel against the vast wilderness. At 48 years old, his face bore the unmistakable marks of both time and sorrow, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen far too much grief for one lifetime. His graying beard, untrimmed for months, matched the unkempt wildness of his surroundings. Blending him into the landscape like another scarred relic of survival, Jonas moved through his daily routine with mechanical precision. Every action performed the same as yesterday, the silence broken only by the steady crunch of his boots on the carpet of fallen pine needles. His mountains had become his chosen refuge after Sarah's death 3 years ago. Here, high above the valleys and far from the sympathetic glances and well-meaning but unbearable conversations of others, he could wrap himself in solitude like a protective blanket, shutting the world out 1 mile at a time. The path he walked was familiar, an established daily circuit he used to check for any unwanted visitors who might dare to approach his property. The thin February air bit cold through his worn jacket, stinging against exposed skin, but he barely noticed such discomfort anymore. Physical hardship was preferable to the sharper, lingering emotional pain he had fled from in the world below. A sound stopped him mid-stride, a low, pained growl that didn't belong in these woods. Jonas hesitated, his instinct for isolation warring fiercely with his curiosity. The sound came again, weaker this time, muffled by distance. From behind a dense cluster of scrub oak clinging to the slope, moving cautiously, Jonas approached the source, each step deliberate. What he found made his breath catch in his throat. A mother bobcat lay helplessly trapped, her left front paw caught cruelly in the steel jaws of an illegal trap. Her golden eyes, wide and burning with fear and fury, met his. Ow! Her tawny coat was dusty, matted, and streaked with blood, her sides heaving with each desperate, labored breath. "Easy there," Jonas murmured, his voice rough and gravelly from disuse. The bobcat's ears flattened against her head, and she bared her teeth in a silent snarl. But something in her posture told him she was too weak to put up a fight. How long had she been here, pinned in place, slowly starving, waiting for death? Jonas knew he should walk away. Wild animals were unpredictable and dangerous, especially when cornered. But as he looked at the trapped creature, vivid memories of Sarah flooded back, her gentle insistence on stopping for every injured bird or rabbit they found, her passionate speeches about mankind's responsibility to care for the natural world, her unwavering compassion that always overruled practicality. "Sarah would never forgive me if I left you here," whispered more to himself than to the bobcat, his voice heavy with a grief that still hadn't faded. With slow, deliberate movements, Jonas removed his jacket and approached the trap. The bobcat watched him intently, her golden eyes never leaving his face. He could see old scars in her fur-faded reminders that this wasn't her first cruel brush with human interference. "I'm going to help you," he said softly, knowing the words meant nothing to her, but needing to fill the charged, dangerous silence. "Just don't take my hand off, okay?" The steel trap was illegal for good reason. Its cruel teeth had cut deep into the bobcat's leg. Jonas positioned his jacket carefully, ready to throw it over her if she lunged. With trembling hands, he worked the stubborn mechanism of the trap, his fingers growing numb with cold and tension as the seconds dragged. The bobcat remained eerily still, as though she somehow understood his intent. When the trap finally sprang open, she pulled her injured paw free, but didn't immediately flee. For a lingering moment, predator and man locked eyes. Jonas saw something in that golden gaze, Not only pain and fear, but a spark of intelligence. And raw determination that stirred something long dormant in his own heart. Then she was gone. Limping swiftly into the underbrush, with remarkable speed despite her injury, Jonas remained kneeling in the dirt, his hands shaking not from fear, but from an unexpected surge of emotion. For the first time in years, he felt something besides grief and numbness, a small spark of fragile purpose. That evening Jonas found himself doing something he hadn't done since Sarah's death, caring about another living creature's fate. He wrapped portions of his latest venison hunt in brown paper and placed them carefully near the spot where he'd found the bobcat. It was foolish, perhaps even reckless and dangerous, but he couldn't shake the memory of those intelligent, haunting eyes. As he walked back to his cabin in the gathering dusk, Jonas realized his steps felt lighter, less burdened. The familiar weight of isolation seemed a fraction less crushing. He didn't know if the bobcat would survive, if she would find the food he had left, or if she would ever cross his path again. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. In his cabin, that night, Jonas sat in his familiar chair by the wood stove, the fire crackling softly, but his thoughts weren't on his grief. Instead, he found himself wondering about the bobcat, hoping she had found shelter, that her injury wouldn't prove fatal. The simple act of caring about another living creature's fate felt both foreign and familiar, like discovering an old photograph of a forgotten moment. He touched the rough surface of his beard, remembering how Sarah used to tease him about keeping it neat. Perhaps tomorrow he would dig out his old trimming scissors. Perhaps it was time to start caring again, not just about injured bobcats in the woods, but about himself too. Jonas stirred awake as the first rays of sunlight crept through his cabin window. His joints ached from yesterday's encounter with the trapped bobcat, a reminder that his mission of mercy hadn't been a dream. He pulled himself from his worn leather armchair where he'd dozed off, rubbing his stiff neck. The morning ritual was simple, coffee brewing in the battered pot on his wood stove, while he stood at his kitchen window. The view hadn't changed. In 3 years, dense pines, rocky outcrops, and the endless Arizona sky. But today felt different. Movement caught his eye near the tree line. Jonas squinted, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. There she was, the mother bobcat from yesterday, her tawny coat distinctive even at this distance. The steel traps. Cruel mark was visible on her leg, but she stood steady, staring directly at his cabin with intense golden eyes. "Well, I'll be," Jonas murmured, setting down his cup. Yesterday's hostility had vanished from her gaze. Instead, there was something else, an almost human quality that made his breath catch. It wasn't just hunger, it was desperation, plea. The bobcat took a few steps toward the forest, then stopped, looking back at him. Jonas had spent enough years tracking to recognize an invitation when he saw one. Every instinct warned against following a wild animal into the brush. But something deeper than reason pulled him forward. He grabbed his jacket and stepped out onto his porch. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Bobcat waited, watching his every move. When Jonas reached the edge of his clearing, she moved deeper into the undergrowth, pausing every few yards to ensure he followed. "This goes against everything I know about wild animals," Jonas said softly, ducking under low-hanging branches. His tracker's training kept his footsteps quiet, though the bobcat seemed unconcerned about stealth. She led him along a winding path, her injured leg causing a slight limp that made his heart twist with sympathy. After about 5 minutes, she stopped beside a fallen log, partially hollowed by age and weather. Jonas stayed back, respecting the invisible boundary between them. The mother bobcat approached the log, and then something squeaked. Jonas's eyes widened as 2 tiny heads poked out from the log's dark interior. Bobcat kittens, no more than a few weeks old, their spotted coats still fuzzy and their eyes huge. In their small faces, they were desperately thin, their movements weak and unsteady. "Lord," Jonas whispered, his throat tight. The mother's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been able to hunt properly with her injury. These little ones were starving. The mother bobcat sat beside the log, her posture both protective and resigned. She had done something almost unthinkable for a wild animal. She had revealed her vulnerable offspring to a human. The trust implicit in that act staggered Jonas. "Stay here," he said quietly, backing away slowly. "I'll be right back. Be right back." He hurried back to his cabin, hands shaking slightly as he gathered supplies. The remainder of yesterday's venison went into a bag, along with an old plastic bowl he filled with fresh water. His mind raced with questions. Why him? Seen in him that made her take this extraordinary risk? When he returned to the log, the family was still there. The mother watched calmly as Jonas placed the meat and water a respectful distance from the den. The kittens' noses twitched at the scent of food, but they stayed hidden until their mother approached the offerings first. Jonas settled onto a fallen tree several yards away, his heart full as he watched the small family eat. The mother bobcat took only a few bites before focusing on her kittens, nudging them toward the food. Their weak attempts to eat the meat brought tears to Jonas's eyes, tears he hadn't shed since Sarah's funeral. "I'll help you," he promised, quietly. "All of you." The mother bobcat looked up at his words, meeting his gaze with those intelligent golden eyes. There was no fear there now, no hostility, just a wild animal's version of trust. Born of desperate need and perhaps some innate recognition of kindness, Jonas stayed until they finished eating and drinking. The kittens already looking more lively. The mother herded them back into their den, then turned to look at Jonas one last time before disappearing into the log herself as he walked back to his cabin. Jonas felt shaken to his core. For 3 years, he'd done everything possible to avoid connections, to prevent any new attachments that could lead to more pain. Yet here he was, already deeply invested in the survival of this small wild family. He couldn't explain why the bobcat had chosen him, of all people, to trust with her precious secret. But as he reached his cabin's porch, Jonas realized that for the first time in years, the crushing weight of solitude felt a little lighter. These creatures needed him, and maybe in some way he couldn't yet understand. He needed them too. The bobcat took a few steps toward the forest, then stopped, looking back at him. Jonas hesitated only briefly before grabbing his jacket. Something in those eyes compelled him to follow. She led him through the underbrush, her wounded leg causing a slight limp, but not slowing her determined pace. Jonas kept his distance, respecting the wild creature's space, while marveling at this impossible trust. After about 50 yards, she stopped beside a fallen log, partially hollowed by time and weather. A tiny mew emerged from within. Jonas's heart skipped as 2 small faces peered out, bobcat kittens, their spotted fur still fuzzy with youth. Their eyes were huge with hunger, ribs visible beneath their thin coats. The mother bobcat settled beside the log, her gaze now shifting between Jonas and her babies. "So that's why," Jonas whispered, understanding flooding through him. She hadn't just been seeking help for herself. She was desperate to save her kittens. Later that afternoon, as Jonas hiked back from leaving food and water for the bobcat family, he heard voices carrying through the trees. He froze, then carefully moved behind a thick pine trunk. 2 men emerged into view on the trail below. "Boone wants another dozen traps set through here by tomorrow," one man said, adjusting the heavy pack on his shoulder. "Says he's seen fresh bobcat signs. Ain't enough that he's got half the mountain trapped already." The other grumbled. "Getting greedy with them for prices so high?" "Watch your mouth. Calder Boone ain't someone you want to cross. Remember what happened to that game warden who tried asking questions last year?" Jonas's jaw tightened as he listened. He'd heard of Calder. Boone, most people in 3 counties had. The rancher had built an empire on cattle, but rumors persisted about his other operations. Illegal trapping, selling furs on the black market, greasing palms to look the other way. But no one dared stand against him. The men continued down the trail, their voices fading. Jonas waited several minutes before moving, his mind racing. He'd noticed more steel traps appearing in the area lately, cleverly hidden in likely game trails. Now he knew why. Over the next few days, Jonas established a careful routine. He'd bring food to the bobcats at dawn and dusk, always checking carefully for watchers first. The kittens were growing stronger, and the mother's leg was healing, though. She'd likely always carry a limp from the trap's damage. But he also found more traps. At least 6 new ones within half a mile of the bobcat's den. Jonas disabled each one he discovered, knowing he was risking Boone's wrath. The rancher's reputation for dealing harshly with those who interfered with his operations was well known. One morning, Jonas heard the distinctive rumble of approaching vehicles. He crouched in dense brush as 2 pickup trucks stopped on the logging road below his cabin. Calder Boone himself stepped out of the lead truck, his broad-shouldered frame radiating authority. His cold eyes surveyed the landscape as his men gathered around. "Something's affecting our trap lines," Boone said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Either we've got an interfering dude-gooder, or someone trying to muscle in on our territory. Either way, I want it stopped. Could be that hermit." Up in the old Murphy cabin, one man suggested, jerking his thumb toward Jonas's home. "Riker, I think his name is?" "Look into him," Boone ordered, "but keep your distance for now. I don't want to spook our quarry. This is prime bobcat territory, and with fur prices what they are, I'm not losing this opportunity to some bleeding heart." Jonas remained motionless until they departed, his heart pounding. The threat was no longer just to the bobcat's Boones. Men would be watching him now too, but as he thought of those trusting kittens and their brave mother, he knew he couldn't abandon them. That evening, as Jonas left food at the den site, he heard the mother bobcat's soft warning growl before he saw her. She was crouched protectively over her kittens, staring past him into the gathering darkness. Jonas slowly turned, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Still, the bobcat's behavior was clear. Danger was near. He would have to be even more careful. Now, Boone's trappers were closing in, and the bobcat's survival hung by a thread. Jonas touched the wedding ring he still wore, remembering how his wife had always said that doing the right thing was rarely easy. For the first time in years, he felt the fog of grief lifting, replaced by a clear sense of purpose. These creatures needed him, and he would not let them down. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines as Jonas made his way back from checking on the bobcat family. His boots crunched softly on fallen needles, but his mind was elsewhere, remembering how the kittens had grown stronger over the past weeks, how their mother's leg was finally healing. A sense of quiet satisfaction warmed his chest. Despite the gnawing worry that had taken root there, that worry proved justified when he spotted fresh boot prints in the dirt, much larger than his own. They crisscrossed the path ahead, telling a clear story. Calder's men had been here, and recently. Jonas knelt to examine a disturbed trap site, noting how the steel jaws had been reset after he'd sprung them days ago. Nearby lay scattered bits of the venison he'd left for the bobcats. Getting careless, he muttered to himself. He should have been more careful about covering his tracks, about hiding the evidence of his interference. But what was done. That evening, as Jonas sat at his rough-hewn kitchen table cleaning his rifle, the first shot cracked through the twilight air. The bullet splintered his window frame, sending wooden shards flying. Jonas dropped to the floor, his heart pounding. Another shot followed, then another, each one deliberate, not meant to hit him, but to send a message. "That's your only warning, Riker," a voice bellowed from the darkness. "Stay out of Boone's business if you know what's good for you." Jonas stayed low, crawling to the window. He caught glimpses of figures moving between the trees, their shapes black against the dying light. 3 men, maybe 4, all armed. The crack of another warning shot sent him pressing against the wall, his breath coming in short bursts. When silence finally fell, Jonas remained still for a long time, listening to the rapid thunder of his own heartbeat. His hands trembled slightly as he lit a kerosene lamp, casting warm light across the cabin's interior. The familiar space felt different, now violated, threatened. His sanctuary was no longer truly safe as he swept up broken glass and plugged the bullet holes with rags. Jonas's mind raced. He could back down, pretend he'd never seen the bobcats, let nature take its course. It would be the sensible thing. To do the safe thing? But as he worked, memories of his wife Sarah surfaced unbidden. Her gentle strength, her fierce protection of the weak. What would she think of him if he turned away now? I can't just let it happen, he whispered to the empty room. The words surprised him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken aloud to himself. But they felt right, felt true. Dawn found Jonas checking the bobcat's den with extra caution. The mother cat emerged from the hollow log, regarding him with those knowing eyes. Her kittens tumbled after her, their playful energy a stark contrast to the tension Jonas carried. He watched them nurse, their tiny bodies pressed against their mother's warmth, and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about animals anymore. It was about standing up to the kind of cruelty that saw living creatures as nothing but profit. It's a kind of cruelty that had been allowed to flourish because good people looked the other way. Jonas had been looking the other way for years, wrapped in his grief like a protective blanket. But Sarah wouldn't have looked away. She would have fought, not with guns or violence, but with the quiet determination that had marked everything she did. Jonas felt a familiar ache in his chest at the thought of her. But for the first time in years, it came with something else, purpose. He knew Calder's men would be back, knew that the threats would escalate beyond warning shots. Smart move would be to retreat, to fade back into his solitude, and let Boone have his way. But as he watched the Bobcat family, saw how the mother trusted him despite every instinct telling her not to, Jonas realized he couldn't do that. Looks like we're in this together, he murmured to the mother cat. She blinked at him slowly, her golden eyes reflecting the morning light. Jonas straightened up, feeling the weight of his decision settle onto his shoulders. The danger was real. Calder Boone wasn't known for his mercy. But for the first time since Sarah's death, Jonas had found something worth fighting for. He began planning as he walked back to his cabin, mind working through what needed to be done. He would need to be smarter, more careful, would need to find ways to protect both himself and the bobcats without drawing more attention. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with risk, but Jonas felt more alive than he had in years. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dawn mist. Jonas paused at his cabin door, looking back toward where the Bobcat family denned. He couldn't see them from here, but he knew they were there, counting on him. His hands were steady now, his purpose clear. Whatever came next, he would face. Jonas followed the subtle trail through the dense underbrush, tracking the mother bobcat's distinctive paw prints in the soft earth. The morning sun filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. He'd gotten better at reading her movements over the past weeks. But today, she'd led him farther from his usual patrol route. The trail wound deeper into Calder's property than Jonas had ever ventured before. His instincts screamed caution, but his need to ensure the bobcat's safety drove him forward. The terrain changed gradually, becoming more open as he approached what appeared to be an old maintenance road. That's when he saw it, a large barn, weather-beaten and gray, standing alone. In a small clearing, something about it felt wrong. The building was too isolated, too carefully positioned away from the main ranch operations. Jonas crept closer, staying within the tree line. No vehicles were visible, but fresh tire tracks marked the dirt road. Leading to the structure, his heart pounded as he approached the barn's side door. Years of solitude had sharpened his senses. He could usually tell when others were nearby. Right now, the place felt deserted. The door wasn't locked, just secured with a simple latch. Jonas hesitated only briefly before sliding it open. The musty interior was dim, but enough light filtered through gaps in the wooden walls to illuminate a horrifying sight. Rows of animal pelts hung from ceiling beams, dozens upon dozens of them. Fox, coyote, bobcat, too many to count. The scale of it struck him like a physical blow. These weren't just from local trapping. This was organized, industrial-scale poaching. Moving. Deeper into the barn, Jonas discovered shipping crates stamped with international addresses. His hands shook as he examined documents scattered across a makeshift desk. Export permits with falsified numbers, invoices for fur shipments to overseas buyers. The truth hit him hard. Calder wasn't just killing predators to protect his livestock. He was running a sophisticated smuggling operation. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a nosy neighbor. A cold voice froze Jonas in place. Turned slowly to find Calder Boone standing in the doorway blocking the exit. The rancher's broad shoulders filled the frame and his eyes held. The same merciless calculation Jonas had seen in them before. "You've been causing me trouble, Riker," Calder said, taking a step forward. "Disabling my traps, interfering with my business. I thought those warning shots might convince you to mind your own affairs." Jonas backed away, his mind racing. "This isn't just about predator control, is it? You're selling these pelts overseas? It's called diversifying my interests." Calder's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And you're becoming an expensive nuisance." The rancher lunged forward with surprising speed. Jonas barely managed to dodge, knocking over a stack of crates in the process. The crash echoed through the barn. As he scrambled toward the far end, looking for another exit, Calder caught up to him near the back wall. The first punch caught Jonas in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He struck back desperately, landing a solid blow to Calder's jaw. The larger man staggered, but didn't go down. They grappled in the dim light, crashing into shelves and equipment. Jonas felt his shirt tear as Calder grabbed him, trying to pin him down. Pain exploded in his shoulder as he wrenched free, slamming into a support beam. Through sheer desperation, Jonas managed to break away. He spotted a small window high on the back wall and lunged for it. Glass shattered as he crashed through, landing hard on the ground outside. Sharp pain lanced through his side, where the broken glass had cut him. Behind him, Calder's enraged shout spurred him to his feet. Jonas ran, ignoring the burning in his lungs and the warm blood soaking his shirt. He crashed through the underbrush, taking the most difficult route back into the forest. His years of living in these mountains gave him an advantage. He knew every hollow and ravine. Only when he was certain he wasn't being followed did Jonas slow down. His entire body ached, and his shirt was stained red where the glass had sliced his side. The cut wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening, but it burned fiercely. His shoulder throbbed where he'd hit the beam, and his ribs screamed with every breath. Leaning against a tree, Jonas tried to process what he'd discovered. The scale of Calder's operation was staggering. This wasn't just about a few trapped bobcats anymore. It was an international smuggling ring protected by local corruption. And now Calder knew that Jonas had seen everything. The stakes had changed. This wasn't just about protecting the mother bobcat and her kittens anymore. It had become a fight for survival, his and theirs. Jonas pressed a hand against his bleeding side and started the long, painful walk back to his cabin, knowing that Calder wouldn't let this end here. Jonas's ribs ached with every breath as he steered his old pickup truck down the winding mountain road. The encounter with Calder had left him battered, with purple bruises blooming across his side and a deep cut above his right eye that still trickled blood. But the physical pain wasn't what troubled him most. It was the weight of knowing he couldn't protect the bobcats alone anymore. The wildlife office sat at the edge of town, a modest building with peeling green paint and a dusty parking lot. Jonas gripped the steering wheel tighter, remembering the last time he'd spoken to Ellen Ward 5 years ago. She'd reached out after his wife's death, offering support and work opportunities. But he'd shut her out like everyone else, taking a deep breath that made his ribs protest.
"Oh, God."
Jonas grabbed the manila envelope containing photos he'd managed to take of Calder's operation and pushed open his truck door. The morning sun felt harsh on his bruised face as he limped toward the building's entrance. Ellen was at her desk when he walked in, her lean frame bent over paperwork. She looked up, and surprise flickered across her features before her expression hardened. "Jonas Riker," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's been a while." Ellen, he nodded, suddenly aware of how he must look beaten, bloody, and desperate. "I need your help." She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You look like hell, Calder Boone's doing," Jonas said, dropping the envelope on her desk. "He's running more than just a ranching operation up there." Ellen's eyes narrowed at Calder's name, but she opened the envelope and began examining the photos. Jonas watched as her professional skepticism gave way to focused attention. The images showed stacks of pelts, far more than any legal operation would produce, along with shipping manifests and foreign buyers' information he'd managed to photograph. I know how this looks, Jonas said quietly. The hermit coming down from the mountain with wild accusations. But there's a mother bobcat and 2 kittens up there. Calder's men nearly caught them yesterday. They're closing in, and I can't. His voice caught unexpectedly. I can't protect them alone. Ellen set the photos down and looked at him for a long moment. Why now, Jonas? Why break your isolation for this? Jonas met her gaze. Because sometimes life gives you a second chance. To do the right thing. That mother bobcat trusted me when she had every reason not to. I can't let her down. Something softened in Ellen's expression. She'd known Jonas before his wife's death, had seen his skill and dedication as a tracker. Tell me everything, she said finally. For the next hour, Jonas explained about finding the trapped bobcat, her surprising trust, the discovery of her kittens, and his growing awareness of Calder's illegal operation. Ellen listened intently, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. Calder's got connections, she said when he finished. Local officials look the other way. We'll need solid evidence, not just suspicions. I know where he keeps his records, Jonas said. In that barn where I took the photos, but I couldn't get to them alone. Ellen drummed her fingers on her desk, thinking, it's not just about the bobcats anymore. If what you're saying is true, this is an international smuggling operation that brings in federal jurisdiction. She looked at him seriously. Are you ready for that? It means coming back to the world, Jonas. Testifying. Being visible again. Jonas touched his bruised ribs, remembering the trust in the mother bobcat's eyes when she'd led him to her kittens. I'm ready, he said firmly. I've been hiding long enough. Ellen stood up. Decision made. All right. We'll need to document everything properly. I have some contacts in the Federal Wildlife Service who can help. But Jonas, she added, her voice gentler, I'm glad you came back. For the first time in years, Jonas felt the walls of his isolation cracking. The prospect of working with others, of fighting for something bigger than himself, stirred something he'd thought long dead. It wouldn't be easy, Calder, wouldn't. Go down without a fight? But he wasn't alone anymore. Thank you, he said simply, meaning it for more than just her help with Calder. Ellen nodded, already reaching for her phone. Let's get started. Those bobcats are counting on us. As Ellen began making calls, Jonas felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He'd spent years avoiding human connection, convinced it would only lead to more pain. But watching Ellen work, seeing her immediate commitment to helping, despite their strained history, he realized that sometimes the very connections he'd been avoiding were exactly what he needed to make a difference. Jonas and Ellen huddled over a worn topographical map, spread across her desk at the Wildlife Management Office. Early morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the paper as they traced potential routes through the mountain terrain. If we set up feeding stations here and here, Jonas pointed to 2 spots deep in the forest. His finger tracing along a ravine, it'll draw them away from Calder's trap lines. His ribs still ached from his encounter with Calder, but determination burned in his eyes. Ellen nodded, making careful notes in her official logbook. I'll start building the case file. We'll need photographs, GPS, coordinates of the illegal traps, and documentation of any injured wildlife. She paused, looking up at Jonas with concern. But you need to be careful. Calder's men won't hesitate to hurt you if they catch you interfering again. I know the risks, Jonas said quietly. Bobcats are counting on us. Over the next few days, Jonas established a new routine. Each morning, he'd hike deeper into the forest, past the usual trap lines, carrying fresh meat and water. The mother bobcat seemed to understand his intentions, following at a distance as he set up the feeding stations. Him with what he could swear was gratitude. Ellen, meanwhile, worked through official channels. She photographed disturbed trap sites, documented their locations, and began building a case file that would be impossible for state authorities to ignore. We need concrete evidence, she explained to Jonas. Something that proves the scale of his operation. Their careful plans were tested one crisp morning when Jonas heard a frightened cry while checking the feeding stations. His heart dropped. As he recognized the sound, one of the kittens was in trouble, following the desperate mews. He found the smallest kitten caught in one of Calder's steel traps. The device hadn't fully closed, but the kitten was trapped nonetheless, its tiny paw pinned awkwardly. The mother bobcat paced nearby, making low growling sounds that were somewhere between warning and distress. Jonas's hands trembled as he assessed the situation. The mother could easily attack him if she misinterpreted his actions. But leaving the kitten wasn't an option. The trap could tighten further, or Calder's men might find it first. "Easy now," he murmured, slowly approaching the trap. The mother. Bobcat's growls intensified, but she didn't charge. Her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that seemed to bore straight through to his soul. In that moment, Jonas felt the weight of her trust. A wild creature choosing to believe in human kindness despite every reason not to. Moving with deliberate care, Jonas knelt beside the trap. The kitten's frightened eyes darted between him and its mother. "It's okay, little one," he whispered, reaching for the release mechanism. "I've done this before, remember?" The mother bobcat circled closer, her tail twitching with anxiety. Jonas could feel her breath on the back of his neck as he worked to free her baby. One wrong move could spell disaster for both him and the kitten, with practiced fingers. Jonas manipulated the trap's spring. The metal jaws slowly relaxed their grip, and he quickly scooped up the kitten before it could bolt. He needed to check for injuries before releasing it. The mother's growls grew louder, but still she held back. Jonas cradled the kitten gently, examining its paw. Relief flooded through him when he found no serious damage. The trap had only caught loose fur and hadn't broken the skin. "Your little one's going to be just fine," he said softly to the mother bobcat. She stood perfectly still now, watching. As he carefully set her kitten down, the tiny creature immediately scampered to her side, and together they melted into the underbrush. Jonas sat back on his heels, heart pounding. The encounter left him shaken, but oddly elated. The mother bobcat could have attacked at any moment, but she had chosen to trust him instead. This trust felt like a precious gift, one that made all the risks worthwhile. Later that evening, when he reported the incident to Ellen, she was amazed. "That's incredible, Jonas," she said, adding the details to her growing file. "It's kind of interaction between wild predators and humans is almost unheard of." "They know we're trying to help," Jonas replied simply, "and we can't let them down. Calder's operation has to be stopped before more animals get hurt." Ellen nodded grimly. "We're getting closer. Each piece of evidence makes our case stronger." She showed him the thick folder she'd compiled, full of photographs, coordinates, and detailed notes. "Soon, we'll have enough to force the state authorities to act, no matter how many connections Calder has." Jonas touched his still-healing ribs, remembering his violent encounter in Calder's barn. The pain was a constant reminder of what they were up against, but also of what they were fighting to protect. The trust of that mother bobcat, allowing him to handle her kitten, had awakened something in him that he'd thought died with his wife, a sense of purpose, being needed. Jonas crouched behind a fallen log, his heart pounding against his ribs. The beam of flashlight swept through the darkness behind him, accompanied by the sound of crackling twigs and angry voices. Calder's men had found the disturbed trap sites and tracked him down. They were hunting him through the moonlit forest, like a wounded animal. "He went this way," a gruff voice called out. "Follow those tracks." Jonas pressed himself lower to the ground, grateful for the dark clothing he wore. Years of tracking experience had taught him how to move silently through these mountains. He waited until the nearest flashlight beam passed over his position, then crawled sideways through a dense patch of undergrowth. The sharp branches scratched his face, but he kept moving. 20 yards ahead lay a creek bed if he could reach it. He might throw them off his trail. The voices grew closer. Jonas held his breath, counting the seconds between their footsteps. A shot cracked through the night air. The bullet splintered bark just above his head. Jonas sprang up and ran, no longer concerned with stealth. His legs pumped hard as he zigzagged. Between the trees, using their trunks as cover, more shots followed, the reports echoing off the canyon walls. "Don't let him get away." The voice was unmistakable. Calder himself had joined the chase. Jonas's lungs burned as he pushed himself harder. The creek bed appeared ahead, a silver ribbon in the moonlight. Without hesitation, he slid down the steep bank and splashed into the shallow water. The cold shocked his system, but he forced himself to move upstream, careful to stay in the water where he'd leave no tracks. After 50 yards, he climbed out on the opposite bank and ducked behind a boulder. The sounds of pursuit grew distant as Calder's men continued along his original path. Jonas allowed himself a moment to catch his breath, his clothes dripping on the rocky ground. The moment of relief was short-lived. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness directly ahead of him. They had split up to circle around. Jonas turned to retreat, but more lights appeared to his left. They were hurting him, he realized, driving him toward the cliffs. With no other choice, Jonas began climbing. The steep incline, loose rocks clattered beneath his feet as he scrambled upward. The lights below converged on his position. His arms trembled with exhaustion as he pulled himself over ledge after ledge. Finally, he reached the top, and his heart sank. The cliff top was a narrow plateau, ending in a sheer drop of over 100 feet. He was trapped. Nowhere left to run, Riker. Calder's voice carried clearly in the night air. The rancher emerged from the tree line, rifle aimed steadily at Jonas's chest. His men spread out behind him, forming a semicircle of threatening shadows. Jonas backed away until his heels touched the cliff edge. Small rocks broke loose beneath his feet, tumbling into the darkness below. "You can't kill me without consequences, Calder. People know what you're doing." Calder's laugh was cold and sharp as broken glass. "Out here, it's just another tragic accident. Local hermit falls to his death while wandering the mountains at night. Who'd question it?" The rifle barrel gleamed in the moonlight. Jonas could see Calder's finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the drama playing out beneath them. Jonas thought of the mother Bobcat and her kittens, wondering if anyone else would step up to protect them after he was gone. Then something extraordinary happened. A tawny blur launched from the shadows behind Calder. The mother Bobcat, who must have been tracking them through the forest, slammed into the rancher's back with explosive force. Her claws raked his shoulder as Calder stumbled forward, the rifle discharging harmlessly into the air. Chaos erupted. The darkness, as quickly as she had appeared, leaving Calder cursing and bleeding. His men rushed to help him, their formation broken. Jonas seized the opportunity, ducking past them and plunging back into the forest cover. Behind him, Calder's enraged voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Find that damn cat. And Riker, this isn't over." But Jonas was already gone, moving swiftly. Through familiar territory, Mother Bobcat had saved his life, repaying his kindness in a way he never could have imagined. As he made his way back toward safety, he silently thanked the remarkable creature who had chosen to trust him all. Those weeks ago, the pre-dawn light was just beginning to soften the eastern sky when Jonas finally stopped running. His clothes were torn, his body battered, but he was alive. He knew Calder would come after him again, but something had fundamentally shifted tonight. The bond between him and the mother Bobcat had been proven in the crucible of danger. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Jonas pressed himself lower to the ground as flashlight beams swept through the trees. His muscles ached from hours of evasion, but he couldn't stop now. Using every tracking skill he possessed, he moved silently through the underbrush. Placing each foot with careful precision, the voices grew closer. Through the darkness, he recognized Calder Boone's commanding tone. "Cut him off at the ridge. Don't let him reach the county road." Working his way uphill, Jonas felt the terrain becoming steeper and rockier. The dark outline of the cliff face loomed ahead, a dead end. He was running out of options. Behind him, the circle of hunters was tightening. A flashlight beam caught him in its glare. "There he is," someone shouted. Jonas sprinted for higher ground, knowing he was exposed but having no choice. Act! His boot scraped against loose rock as he climbed. When he reached the cliff's edge, he turned to face his pursuers. Calder Boone emerged from the shadows, rifle raised. "Nowhere left to run, Riker," Calder said, his voice cold with triumph. "You should have minded your own business." "Those animals are everyone's business," Jonas replied, standing his ground despite the rifle aimed at his chest. You're destroying more than just wildlife with your greed. Calder's laugh was harsh. Always the bleeding heart. Well, accidents happen in these mountains. No one will question finding your body at the bottom of this cliff. Just as Calder's finger tightened on the trigger, a blur of tawny fur exploded from the brush. The mother bobcat launched herself at Calder with a fierce snarl, striking his arm. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as Calder stumbled backward, crying out in shock and pain. In that moment of chaos, multiple vehicles roared up the forest road below, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Ellen Ward's voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is fish and wildlife. Everyone freeze. Drop your weapons." State troopers and federal agents swarmed up the hillside, their flashlights creating a web of light. Ellen had brought reinforcements. Lots of them. Jonas felt weak with relief as he watched Calder's men dropping their guns, raising their hands in surrender. "Perfect timing," Jonas called out to Ellen as she approached, her badge gleaming. "I've been tracking your GPS signal since you called," she replied with a grim smile. "Soon as you said Calder was moving in, I mobilized every agent within 50 miles. Calder, clutching his scratched arm, snarled, "You've got nothing on me. I've got friends in high places." "Had friends," Ellen corrected, pulling out a thick folder. "We've been building this case for weeks. Your operation is finished, Calder. We've got documented evidence of illegal trapping, endangered species trafficking, and international smuggling. Those friends of yours are being arrested right now." Jonas watched as Calder's face drained of color. The powerful rancher seemed to shrink as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His empire of cruelty was crumbling before his eyes. State troopers led Calder and his men down the hill while federal agents began documenting the scene. Ellen turned to Jonas with concern. "God, you took one hell of a risk tonight. Had to be done," Jonas said simply. His eyes searched the darkness where the mother bobcat had vanished. A movement caught his attention. There she was, watching from the safety of the trees. Her two kittens, bigger now and stronger, huddled near her legs. Ellen followed his gaze. "They'll be safer now. We'll dismantle every illegal trap in these mountains, and the officials who protected him, going down with him. We've got paper trails, bank records, everything. This case will clean house all the way up to the county level." Jonas nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The mother bobcat held his gaze for a long moment, as if acknowledging their shared victory. Then she turned, leading her kittens deeper into the forest. Their tawny forms melted into the shadows until they were gone. "Guess my job here is done," Jonas said softly. Ellen squeezed his shoulder. "You did good, Jonas. Not many would risk everything for a family of wild animals." "They needed someone to care," he replied. "Sometimes that's all it takes." As the law enforcement teams worked below, Jonas stood quietly on the cliff edge, watching the spot where the bobcats had disappeared. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. He had found his purpose again, not in isolation, but in standing up for those who couldn't protect themselves. The night air was cool on his face as distant sirens wailed, carrying Calder Boone away to face justice. In the forest, a bobcat's cry echoed once, not a sound of fear or hunger now, one of freedom. As the state officers led Calder Boone away in handcuffs, Jonas watched from the ridge, his body aching from the chase, but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the mountainside. Ellen Ward approached him, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "The evidence we gathered was overwhelming," she said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The warehouse full of illegal pelts, the documented bribes, the international shipping records. Calder's entire operation is finished. Jonas nodded silently, his eyes drawn to movement at the forest's edge. The mother bobcat had emerged from her hiding place, her two kittens following close behind. Their small bodies looked stronger now, healthier than when he'd first discovered them weeks ago. "They're beautiful," Ellen whispered, keeping her distance to avoid startling them. "You know, when you first came to me about this, I thought grief had finally made you lose your mind." Jonas managed a small smile, remembering their tense first meeting about Calder. "I probably looked crazy," he admitted, his voice rough from disuse. hermit in the mountains, ranting about bobcats and conspiracy. The mother bobcat paused at the tree line, turning to look back at Jonas. Her amber eyes met his, and in that moment he felt the weight of the past few years begin to lift. She had trusted him when she was at her most vulnerable, had chosen him to help protect her family. In doing so, she had given him something he thought he'd lost forever, a purpose. "Thank you," Ellen said quietly, breaking into his thoughts, "for not giving up, for making me listen." She shifted her weight, looking out over the valley where police vehicles were still gathered around Calder's property. Not many people would have risked what you did for wild animals. Jonas watched as the bobcat family began to move deeper into the forest. The kittens bounded ahead, their spotted coats blending with the dappled morning light. Their mother followed, more cautiously, but there was strength in her stride now, confidence in her movements. "They saved me too," Jonas said softly. "I was just existing up here, not really living, hiding from everything that hurt." He touched the worn wedding ring he still wore, but for the first time in years the gesture brought more warmth than pain. "Sarah would have hated seeing me like that." Ellen nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Life has a way of finding us, even when we're trying our hardest to avoid it." She hesitated, then added, "The department could use someone with your tracking skills, you know, especially now that we're cracking down on illegal trading in the area." Jonas considered this as he watched the bobcats disappear into the wilderness. The mother paused one final time, looking back at him before melting into the shadows of the forest. He knew he would probably never see them again, and that was as it should be. They were wild creatures, meant to be free, but something had changed. In him, during these weeks of protecting them, the wall he'd built around himself had crumbled, and he found he didn't want to rebuild it. The mountain wasn't meant to be a hiding place. It was meant to be a home, a place from which to reach out and engage with the world again. "I might be interested," he said finally, turning to Ellen. "Part-time, at least. Someone needs to keep an eye on these ridges." Kellen smiled, relief and something warmer in her expression. "I'll get the paperwork started." She gestured toward her vehicle. "Can I give you a ride back to your cabin? You look like you could use some rest." Jonas took one last look at the forest where the bobcats had vanished. The morning sun had fully risen now, painting the mountains in shades of gold and green. For the first time in years, he felt truly awake, truly present in his own life. "Yes," he said, and his voice was stronger now. "I think I'd like that." As they walked toward Ellen's truck, Jonas felt the familiar weight of grief in his heart, but it was different now, no longer a crushing burden, but a quiet companion to the new sense of purpose that had taken root in his soul. Through the simple act of helping a desperate mother protect her young, he had found his way back to the land of the living. The mountain air was crisp and clean, full of possibility. Jonas breathed it in deeply, knowing that while one chapter had ended, another was just beginning. If tonight's story sat quietly in your heart, subscribe and send it to someone who might need the same comfort.